The sound of the wind at Ross Ice Shelf, which grates on your ears, can make you feel as if the world is dying. I've been in Antarctica for about 6 weeks now, and this constant sound of the wind still makes my hair stand on end. It's the first month of 2024. We should be experiencing summer here right now, but the heat seems to have completely bypassed us. The temperature is around minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and when the wind picks up, which happens every afternoon, it robs your body of heat within minutes. My name is Dr. Emily Ward, and I'm a geologist. I specialize in ice core analysis, which is about as exciting as it sounds to most people. You drill deep into ancient ice, extract cylinders of compressed snow that fell thousands of years ago, and analyze them for climate data. It's meticulous, tedious work. At least, that's what it used to be. Everything changed 3 days ago. Our research station sits about 15 miles inland from McMurdo Station, the largest research facility in Antarctica. There are 8 of us here, myself, 2 other geologists, 3 support staff, a medical officer, and our guide, Marcus Hale. Marcus has been coming to Antarctica for 20 years. He knows the ice better than anyone I've ever met, can read the subtle shifts in weather patterns, and has an almost supernatural ability to navigate in whiteout conditions. We were here to drill a core sample from a particularly old section of the ice shelf. Ground-penetrating radar had suggested that the ice in this area was exceptionally deep, possibly dating back over 1 million years. If we could extract clean samples, it would give us unprecedented insight into Earth's ancient climate. The drilling rig had been running for 4 days straight when we hit something we shouldn't have. I was in the main research tent analyzing samples from the previous day's drilling when Marcus burst through the entrance. His face was flushed, not from the cold, but from exertion. He'd run all the way from the drilling site, about 300 yards away. "Emily," he said, breathing hard, "you need to see this, right now." I've known Marcus for 3 seasons. He doesn't get excited. He doesn't panic. The fact that he'd abandoned his post at the drill site to fetch me personally sent a spike of adrenaline through my system. "What is it?" "Just come, please." I grabbed my parka and followed him out into the biting wind. The drilling site was a small enclosure, barely large enough for the equipment and 2 people. Inside, the drill operator, a Canadian named Sarah Kimball, was staring at her computer screen with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Show her," Marcus said. Sarah pointed at the monitor. "We're at 2,847 meters. Should be solid ice all the way down based on the radar surveys." "Should be?" I asked. "Look at the drill resistance readings." I leaned closer. The graph showed steady, predictable resistance for the first 2,840 meters. Then, abruptly, the resistance dropped to almost nothing. "Void space?" I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew that didn't make sense. Voids don't exist this deep in the ice shelf. The pressure is too enormous. "That's what I thought," Sarah said. "But look at the acoustic returns." She pulled up another display. The acoustic sensor, which sends sound waves down the drill shaft, should have shown a clear echo pattern. Instead, there was something else, something that looked almost like structure. "This has to be an equipment malfunction," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Marcus shook his head. "I had Sarah run a full diagnostic. Everything checks out. Emily, I think we drilled into something." "Into what? There's nothing down there but ice." "I know what the geology says. I also know what the equipment is telling us. There's open space down there, and it's big." I stared at the readings for a long moment, my mind racing through possibilities. Could there be a subglacial lake we didn't know about? That was possible, though unlikely this far inland. Could the ice have fractured, creating a massive cavity? Also possible, but the stability of such a formation would be questionable at best. "We need to inform McMurdo," I finally said. "Already did," Marcus replied. "They're sending someone tomorrow, but Emily, there's something else." He nodded to Sarah, who pulled up a different display. This one showed temperature readings from the drill shaft. At 2,700 meters, the temperature was -45°C, exactly what we'd expect. But look what happened when we penetrated through to the void space. The graph showed a sudden spike. The temperature at the bottom of the shaft was now reading -5°C, 40 degrees warmer than it should be. "That's impossible," I said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "That's what I thought too." We spent the rest of that day checking and rechecking our equipment. Every test came back the same. There was definitely open space beneath us, and it was definitely warmer than it had any right to be. That night, lying in my sleeping bag in the cramped quarters we called home, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, shaking the walls of our temporary structure. But that wasn't what kept me awake. It was the impossibility of what we'd found. Antarctica is, geologically speaking, relatively well understood. We know the ice, we know what's beneath it, primarily bedrock, and in some places, subglacial lakes kept liquid by geothermal heat from the Earth's core. But this was different. The size of the cavity, the temperature, the acoustic signature that suggested structure rather than random geology. None of it fit with what should be there. I must have finally dozed off sometime around 3 in the morning because I woke with the start to Marcus shaking my shoulder. "Emily, they're here." I stumbled out of my sleeping bag, disoriented. Through the small window of our quarters, I could see a helicopter sitting on the ice, its rotors still spinning. Figures were climbing out, bundled against the wind. By the time I got dressed and made it outside, 3 people had entered our main tent. 2 of them I didn't recognize, but the third I knew by reputation. Dr. Robert Zimmerman, the director of Antarctic research operations for the National Science Foundation. Zimmerman was in his 60s, with a weathered face that spoke of many seasons in harsh environments. He nodded curtly when he saw me. "Dr. Ward, I've read your reports. Show me what you found." We gathered around the drill site, and Sarah walked him through the data. Zimmerman asked pointed questions, examining every detail with the scrutiny of someone who'd seen too many false alarms in his career. Finally, he straightened up. "I want to lower a camera down there." "Sir," I said carefully, "the drill shaft is only 6 inches in diameter. Whatever's down there, I'm aware of the limitations, Dr. Ward. I don't expect to see much, but I need to see something before I authorize what I'm thinking of authorizing." It took us 2 hours to rig up a camera system that would survive the descent. We used a fiber optic line, thin enough to thread down the drill shaft, with a small LED and camera assembly at the end. Marcus controlled the descent, slowly feeding the cable down into the darkness. We gathered around a monitor, watching the feed. For the first 2,800 meters, there was nothing to see except the smooth walls of ice, illuminated by the LED. The cable counter ticked downward. 2,810 meters, 2,820, 2,830. At 2,847 meters, everything changed. The ice walls suddenly ended, and the camera was dangling in open space. Sarah adjusted the LED intensity, and what we saw on that screen stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't a natural cavity, it wasn't a subglacial lake, it was a chamber, and it had walls. The camera resolution wasn't great at that distance, and the LED could only illuminate a small area, but what we could see was unmistakable. The walls were smooth, too smooth to be natural. They were carved or built, constructed by something or someone. "My God," Zimmerman whispered. Marcus rotated the camera slowly. The chamber extended beyond what our light could reach, but we caught glimpses of what might have been corridors or passages leading away from the central space. "How old is the ice above this?" Zimmerman asked, his voice tight. I'd done the calculations earlier, but I double-checked my notes. Based on our core samples and the depth, the ice layer directly above the cavity is approximately 300,000 years old, maybe older. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but obvious. If there was a constructed chamber beneath 300,000 years of ice, it predated anything we knew about human civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. "I need to make some calls," Zimmerman said abruptly. He pulled out a satellite phone and walked away from the group, his voice too low to hear. When he returned 15 minutes later, his expression was grim. "Dr. Ward, Mr. Hale, you're to cease all operations immediately. Secure your equipment, but don't touch anything related to the drill site. A specialized team will be here within 48 hours. "What kind of specialized team?" Marcus asked. "The kind that deals with situations that don't officially exist," Zimmerman replied. He looked at me directly. "I need you to understand something. What you found here, it changes things, everything, but it also needs to be handled very carefully. The wrong kind of attention could cause problems." "Are you asking us to keep this quiet?" "I'm telling you that you don't have a choice. You signed non-disclosure agreements when you took this posting. Those agreements now apply to everything you've seen today. You will not discuss this with anyone outside your immediate team. You will not post about it, blog about it, mention it in emails, or reference it in any communication. Is that clear?" We all nodded, though I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I'd signed NDAs before. They were standard in research, but this felt different. This felt like we'd stumbled onto something that powerful people wanted to control. Zimmerman and his team left an hour later, taking copies of all our data. The rest of that day passed in a strange, anxious silence. We went through the motions of our regular duties, but everyone's mind was on what lay beneath us. That night, lying awake again, I found myself thinking about the chamber. Who had built it? When? And most troubling of all, why was it there? The answer to those questions would come soon enough. And when it did, I would wish we'd never drilled that hole. The specialized team arrived exactly 48 hours later, just as Zimmerman had promised. But calling it a team was an understatement. 3 helicopters landed near our camp, disgorging nearly 20 people and what looked like several tons of equipment. Most of them wore unmarked cold weather gear, but I recognized military bearing when I saw it. These weren't scientists, or at least not just scientists. The lead figure who approached our tent removed his hood to reveal a weathered face with ice blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. "I'm Lieutenant Ryan Brooks," he said without preamble. "I'll be coordinating operations here for the foreseeable future. Dr. Ward, Mr. Hale, you'll be working with us." "Working how?" Marcus asked, his tone careful. Brooks gestured toward the drill site. "You found it. You know the ice conditions. We need that local expertise." He paused, then added, "Besides, I don't think either of you could walk away from this, even if we gave you the option." He was right about that. Over the next 6 hours, Brooks's team transformed our small research camp into something that looked more like a military forward operating base. They erected additional structures, installed sophisticated communication equipment, and brought in drilling apparatus that made our original rig look like a child's toy. "We're going to widen the shaft," Brooks explained as we watched his team work. "Create an access tunnel large enough for a person to descend. The engineering challenges are significant. We need to prevent the ice from closing the tunnel behind us, but it's doable." "How long will that take?" I asked. 72 hours, give or take. In the meantime, we're running detailed surveys of everything below us." He led us to a new command tent, where banks of computer monitors displayed various data streams. A young woman with lieutenant's bars on her collar looked up as we entered. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, our geological survey specialist," Brooks said. "Show them what you found." Morrison pulled up a 3-dimensional map on the central screen. "We've been using ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and electromagnetic scanning. What you initially found is just the entrance chamber. Look at this." The 3D map rotated, showing the chamber we'd seen, and revealing that it was connected to a massive network of passages and rooms extending deep into the bedrock beneath the ice. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. "How far does it go?" "At least 12 kilometers in depth, spreading laterally for approximately 8 kilometers in radius. It's not just a structure, it's a city. Or was, a long time ago." I stared at the map, trying to comprehend the scale. This is impossible. No ancient civilization had the capability to build something like this. No ancient human civilization, Brooks corrected quietly. That's the working theory we're operating under. The words hung in the cold air of the tent, non-human. The implication was staggering. You can't be serious, I said. Are you suggesting aliens? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what the evidence indicates. Brooks pulled up another display, showing detailed scans of the chamber walls. The composition is consistent with worked stone, similar to basalt, but with a molecular structure we've never seen before. The construction technique is beyond our current understanding. And the age, he trailed off. The ice is 300,000 years old, I said. At minimum. The structure beneath it is older. We've run preliminary dating on microscopic fragments from the wall samples the drill brought up. Initial results suggest ages in excess of 1 million years. I felt suddenly dizzy and reached for a chair. 1 million years. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, had only existed for roughly 300,000 years. 1 million years ago, our ancestors were still Homo erectus, barely past the stone tool phase. Who else knows about this? Marcus asked. Brooks exchanged a glance with Morrison. Right now? Maybe 50 people worldwide. The National Science Foundation, the Pentagon, the President, and a handful of advisors. This information is classified at the highest levels. If word got out, he shook his head. The geopolitical implications alone would be catastrophic. Religious institutions, governments, the scientific community, everyone would want access, control, answers. It would be chaos. So you're going down there to get those answers first, I said. We're going down there to assess the situation and determine what, if anything, needs to be done. Brooks looked at me intently. And you're coming with us, Dr. Ward. We need your expertise on ice geology. If something goes wrong down there, if the structure is unstable, if there are ice-related hazards, you're the one who might keep us alive. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Brooks's team worked around the clock, using a combination of thermal drilling and mechanical excavation to widen the shaft. They had to work carefully, create the tunnel too quickly, and the stress might cause the ice around it to fracture. But they also had to work fast. We were in the brief Antarctic summer, and once winter set in, this location would become impossible to operate from. I spent those days studying every piece of data we gathered. The more I learned, the more my understanding of reality seemed to shift. The structure below us wasn't just old, it was sophisticated. The passages showed evidence of what might have been ventilation systems. There were chambers that looked suspiciously like living quarters, and deep in the structure, there were readings that suggested some kind of power source might still be active. That last part kept me awake at night. If something was still running down there after 1 million years, what did that say about the technology involved? On the morning of the 4th day, Brooks found me in the command tent, staring at the 3D map for probably the 100th time. "We're ready," he said simply. "Tunnel's complete. Structural integrity checks out. We descend in 2 hours." My stomach dropped. 2 hours? No point in waiting. The weather forecast shows a major storm system moving in tomorrow. If we don't go now, we might not get another chance for weeks. The descent team consisted of 6 people. Brooks, Morrison, 2 military personnel I knew only as Ramirez and Kim, Marcus, and myself. We were equipped with cold weather gear, climbing equipment, communication devices, and enough emergency supplies to survive for 3 days if something went wrong. The tunnel they'd created descended at a 45-degree angle, wide enough for us to walk down in single file. The walls were lined with some kind of polymer coating that prevented ice buildup, and LED strips provided illumination every few meters. It took us 90 minutes to reach the bottom of the tunnel, a distance of nearly 3 kilometers. The temperature increased gradually as we descended, exactly as our initial readings had suggested. By the time we reached the end of the tunnel, it was a relatively balmy -5 Celsius. The tunnel terminated in a small chamber that Brooks's team had carved out where it intersected with the ancient structure. Through an opening ahead, we could see the larger chamber beyond, the one our camera had first glimpsed days earlier. Brooks held up a hand, stopping us. From here on, we follow protocol. No one touches anything unless I clear it first. No wandering off. We stay in visual contact at all times. Clear? We all nodded. Then, one by one, we stepped through the opening into the ancient chamber. The first thing that struck me was the size. The chamber was enormous, easily 50 meters across and 20 meters high. Our light seemed to barely scratch the darkness, revealing smooth walls that curved upward to meet in a domed ceiling. But it was the walls themselves that took my breath away. They were covered in markings, not random carvings or primitive art. These were precise, geometric patterns that seemed to flow across the surface in intricate designs. They reminded me of circuit boards or mathematical equations, but far more complex than anything I'd ever seen. "My God," Morrison whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. "It's beautiful." Marcus had moved to one of the walls and was examining the markings closely. "These aren't carved," he said. "They're part of the stone itself, like they were grown into it somehow." Brooks's radio crackled. It was the surface team checking in. "Ground team, this is base. Do you copy?" "We copy. We're in the main chamber, beginning initial survey." As we spread out to examine the space, I noticed something odd about the floor. It was perfectly level, with no ice accumulation despite the chamber's proximity to the ice shelf above. That shouldn't be possible. Over hundreds of thousands of years, ice should have found its way in through countless tiny fissures. Unless something was preventing it. I knelt down and ran my gloved hand across the floor. It was smooth, like polished stone, but warm to the touch. Not hot, but definitely warmer than it should be. "Brooks," I called out. "The floor, it's generating heat." He joined me, pulling out a thermal sensor. The reading confirmed what I'd felt. The floor was maintaining a constant temperature of exactly 0 Celsius. Just warm enough to prevent ice formation, but not warm enough to be immediately noticeable. "After all this time," Morrison said, "it's still functional. Whatever powers this place hasn't run out." From the far side of the chamber, Ramirez called out, "Sir, I found an opening. Looks like it leads deeper into the structure." We regrouped at the opening, which was a perfect oval about 3 meters high and 2 meters wide. Beyond it, our lights revealed a corridor stretching into darkness. Brooks checked his equipment and the structural sensors his team had placed earlier. "The readings show the corridor is stable. We're going to proceed, but slowly. Dr. Ward, keep monitoring for any ice-related hazards. Mr. Hale, you're our navigation expert. I need you tracking our path so we can find our way back." The corridor was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all the same smooth stone, inscribed with those intricate geometric patterns. Every 20 meters or so, we passed through archways that might have once held doors, though no trace of such mechanisms remained. We traveled about 200 meters when Morrison noticed something. The patterns on the walls, they're changing. She was right. The geometric designs that had seemed random in the entrance chamber were becoming more organized, more purposeful. They seemed to flow in a specific direction, almost like arrows. "They're pointing us somewhere," Marcus said. We followed the patterns for another 100 meters, descending deeper into the structure. The temperature continued to rise gradually. We were now at a comfortable 5 Celsius. I'd removed my outer parka, carrying it instead. The corridor ended in another chamber, smaller than the entrance but still impressively large. This one was clearly designed with a specific purpose in mind. The center of the room was dominated by a raised platform, and on that platform stood something that made us all stop in our tracks. It was a device of some kind, or at least that's what it looked like. The object was roughly cylindrical, about 2 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter, made of a material that seemed to shift between metallic and crystalline depending on the angle of our lights. The same geometric patterns that covered the walls were etched into its surface, but these patterns seemed to pulse with a faint blue-green luminescence. "It's active," Morrison breathed. "After all this time, it's still active." Brooks approached slowly, his sensor array extended. "I'm reading electromagnetic activity. Low level, but definitely present. There's also—" He paused, checking his readings. "This doesn't make sense. I'm detecting quantum fluctuations, like the device is manipulating space-time on a microscopic scale." "Is it dangerous?" I asked. "Unknown. The radiation levels are negligible, well within safe limits. But what it's doing, or why—" He shook his head. Marcus had been examining the platform around the device. "Look at this." He pointed to markings on the floor. Different from the wall patterns, these looked almost like instructions or a diagram. "I think this shows how to activate it, or interact with it, at least." "We're not activating anything," Brooks said firmly. "Not until we understand what we're dealing with." But even as he said it, something changed. The blue-green luminescence in the device suddenly brightened, pulsing with increasing intensity. The temperature in the chamber rose noticeably. "Sir!" Ramirez's voice was alarmed. "My sensors are going crazy. Energy levels are spiking." "Everyone back!" Brooks ordered. "Move back to the corridor!" We scrambled away from the platform as the device's glow intensified. The geometric patterns on the walls began to light up as well, creating a cascade of luminescence that spread throughout the chamber. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a frequency just below hearing. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The lights faded. The vibration ceased. The chamber returned to its previous state, quiet, ancient, still. Except for one thing. On the wall opposite the device, a section had changed. Where there had been blank stone before, there was now an opening, a doorway that definitely hadn't been there minutes ago. Through that doorway, we could see light. Not the harsh white of our LED lamps, but a soft, organic glow that reminded me of bioluminescence. Brooks stared at the opening for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "All right, new situation. Morrison, radio back to base. Update them on our status. Everyone else, maintain position while I assess this opening." He approached the new doorway cautiously, sensors extended. After a minute of careful examination, he turned back to us. "Air quality on the other side is breathable. Temperature is steady at 10 Celsius. No immediate hazards detected." "What do you think is in there?" Kim asked. Brooks looked at the glowing doorway, then back at us. "Only one way to find out. But something tells me this is what we were meant to find. This whole structure, it's been waiting for someone to come down here and wake it up." The implications of that were staggering. We hadn't discovered a dead city. We'd found something that was still alive in its own way, still waiting, still functional after 1,000,000 years of ice and darkness. And now it wanted to show us something. Brooks organized us into a tight formation before we stepped through the doorway. Military personnel at the front and rear, with Marcus, Morrison, and me in the middle. Whatever lay beyond, we'd face it together. The passage through the doorway was short, maybe 3 meters, and opened into a space that defied every expectation I'd formed about this ancient place. It was a garden. Not just any garden, but a thriving ecosystem contained within a massive underground chamber. The ceiling soared at least 50 meters above us, and from it hung what could only be described as artificial suns, spheres of soft, warm light that bathed everything below in a glow that felt like dawn. Beneath these lights grew plants unlike anything in our botanical records. Some resembled ferns, but with crystalline structures growing from their fronds. Others looked almost like trees, but their trunks were translucent, revealing a network of luminescent channels that pulsed with what might have been sap, or something more exotic. This is impossible, Morrison said, her voice barely above a whisper. Plants can't survive down here. The conditions are perfect, I interrupted, pulling out my own sensors. Look at these readings. The temperature is stable at 18 Celsius, humidity at 6%. The light spectrum from those spheres. I trailed off, checking my readings again to make sure I wasn't misreading them. It's a perfect match for natural sunlight. Whoever built this place created an entire biosphere. Marcus was kneeling beside one of the strange fern-like plants, examining it closely without touching. Dr. Ward, these aren't dead. Look at this. New growth. These plants are alive. That's not possible, I said again. But the evidence was right in front of us. These plants had been growing down here, alone in the dark, for hundreds of thousands of years. The implications made my head spin. Brooks was studying the artificial suns overhead. If those lights had been running continuously since this place was built, he didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The power requirements for such a system over such a time span would be astronomical. Whatever energy source this civilization had developed, it made our most advanced nuclear reactors look like steam engines. We moved deeper into the garden, following what appeared to be a path made of the same smooth stone as the corridors. The ecosystem around us became increasingly diverse. We passed pools of water, actual liquid water, with more plant life growing at their edges. I knelt beside one pool and carefully tested it with a chemical sensor. Fresh water, I reported. Clean enough to drink. And look, there's movement in the water. Something small and silvery darted through the depths of the pool. Fish. Or something like fish. Living creatures that had existed in isolation for longer than my mind could truly comprehend. How? Morrison asked the question we were all thinking. How did they engineer an ecosystem that could survive in complete isolation for this long? It violates everything we know about ecological stability and genetic diversity. Maybe they didn't engineer it to just survive, Marcus said thoughtfully. Maybe they engineered it to adapt, to evolve. The path led us to the far side of the garden chamber, where another doorway waited. Unlike the previous passages, this one had markings around its frame that seemed more deliberate, more significant. Brooks spent several minutes documenting them with his camera before we proceeded. Beyond the doorway lay something that took us from wonder into genuine unease. It was a habitation space, not ancient ruins or archaeological remains, but rooms that looked maintained. The chamber beyond the doorway opened into what could only be described as living quarters. The walls were the same smooth stone, but here they were divided by openings into smaller spaces, rooms or cells, each about 4 meters square. In each room, we found artifacts, furniture-like structures made from materials we couldn't immediately identify, containers of various sizes, objects whose purposes we could only guess at. But everything was arranged, organized, as if the inhabitants had simply stepped out and might return at any moment. This is a residential area, Morrison said, her voice echoing in the stillness. These are homes. We moved carefully through the space, documenting everything. In one room, I found what appeared to be a writing surface. A large, flat panel mounted to the wall, covered in the geometric patterns we'd seen throughout the structure. But these patterns were different, less organized, more varied. Almost like notes, personal records. They wrote on the walls, I said, or stored information in them somehow. Look at this. These patterns are unique to this room, different from anything we've seen before. Brooks was examining a container in another room. Dr. Ward, you need to see this. The container was transparent, or had become transparent when Brooks activated something near its base, and inside was an object that made my blood run cold. It was a tool, or a weapon. The design was elegant, almost organic, crafted from a material that seemed to shift between liquid and solid states as we watched. But what disturbed me wasn't the object itself. It was what it meant. They were builders, Marcus said quietly, voicing what we were all thinking. Engineers, not just primitive cave dwellers. They had technology. Advanced technology. We spent the next hour exploring the residential area, finding more and more evidence of a sophisticated civilization. There were communal spaces that might have been gathering areas or dining halls, smaller chambers that could have been workshops or laboratories, and everywhere, those geometric patterns telling a story we couldn't yet read. It was Ramirez who found the most significant discovery. She'd been exploring a corridor that branched off from the main residential area when she called out, "Sir, you need to see this, now." We hurried to her position and found her standing before a large chamber that dwarfed all the others we'd seen. The space was circular, easily 100 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that displayed something extraordinary. Stars. The entire ceiling was covered in pinpoints of light arranged in patterns that looked like constellations, but not constellations I recognized. The arrangements were wrong, or rather, they were right for a time that wasn't our present. "Morrison," Brooks said urgently, "can you identify these stellar patterns?" Morrison was already pulling up astronomical software on her tablet, comparing the ceiling to known star maps. After several minutes of analysis, she looked up with an expression of shock. "Sir, if I'm reading this correctly, these are the constellations as they would have appeared approximately 900,000 years ago. The precession of the equinoxes, the movement of stars, it all matches. This isn't decorative. It's a star map from their time." The weight of that realization settled over us like a physical thing. We weren't just looking at the ruins of an ancient civilization. We were looking at evidence of a people who had observed the sky, understood astronomy, and possessed the mathematical sophistication to map the heavens nearly 1,000,000 years before humans had even evolved. In the center of the chamber stood another platform, similar to the one that held the device in the earlier room. But this platform was larger, and what rested on it was unmistakable. They were remains. Skeletal remains, laid out in a circular pattern around a central point, arranged with obvious reverence and care. "A burial chamber," Marcus breathed. "This is where they honored their dead." We approached slowly, respectfully. There were 7 sets of remains, each positioned to point toward a specific constellation on the ceiling above. The bones were preserved in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Not fossilized, but maintained in an almost crystalline state that had prevented decay. Morrison knelt beside the nearest set of remains, careful not to touch. "These aren't human," she said, unnecessarily. The skull structure was wrong. Larger cranium, different bone density, eye sockets positioned at a slightly different angle. But they're bipedal, roughly humanoid proportions. Tool users, clearly, intelligent. "Our predecessors," I said softly. "They were here first, before the ice, before humans. They built this place, created that garden, mapped the stars, and then they were gone." "Not gone," Brooks corrected, pointing to something I'd missed. On the wall behind the burial platform was a final marking, larger than any we'd seen before, its geometric patterns more complex, more deliberate. And unlike every other marking in this place, this one was glowing with a steady, pulsing light. They left a message, and I think it's meant for whoever found them. As we stood there, staring at that glowing message we couldn't yet read, I felt the weight of history pressing down on us. We had come to Antarctica seeking climate data, looking to understand Earth's past. We'd found something far more profound. Evidence that we weren't the first intelligent species to call this planet home. But the story wasn't over. That glowing message suggested these ancient people had anticipated that someone might find them someday. They'd preserved their city, maintained their garden, left their records. They'd waited in the dark for hundreds of thousands of years. The question was, what did they want us to know? And more troubling, why did I have the growing feeling that we'd triggered something by coming here? That the activation of the device, the opening of the doorway, the lights coming on, it had all been planned, set in motion by our arrival. We weren't just discovering this place. We were being shown it. Step by careful step, leading us deeper into the structure, revealing more and more of its secrets, leading us toward something. Brooks must have been thinking along the same lines because he suddenly said, "We're leaving. Now. Back to the surface." "What? But we've barely begun to explore." "That's exactly the problem, Dr. Ward. We've been here for 6 hours. In that time, doors have opened for us. Lights have activated. We've found a perfectly preserved city that should be ruins. This place wants us here. And until we understand why, we're not pushing any deeper." He was right, and I knew it. My scientific curiosity was screaming at me to stay, to explore, to learn. But my survival instincts, honed by years of working in dangerous environments, were agreeing with Brooks. We'd stumbled into something much larger than an archaeological discovery. We'd found a message from the deep past, preserved with technology we couldn't begin to understand, left by a species that had vanished before humans had even evolved, and that message was still being delivered. The question of what it would ultimately say, and what it would cost us to hear it, remained unanswered as we began our long climb back to the surface. The storm hit 3 hours after we reached the surface. Brooks's timing had been perfect. If we'd stayed below any longer, we might have been trapped there for days. The Antarctic winter was showing its teeth early this year. For the next 48 hours, winds exceeding 80 miles per hour battered our camp while we huddled inside, reviewing our data and debating what we'd found. The debate wasn't about whether the discovery was significant. That much was obvious. The question was what to do about it. Brooks spent hours in encrypted communication with his superiors, while Morrison, Marcus, and I pored over every piece of data we'd collected. The more we studied the geometric patterns on the walls, the more convinced we became that they were a form of writing or data storage. The patterns weren't random. They had structure, syntax, repetition of certain elements that suggested language. "If we could decode this," Morrison said on the second day of the storm, "we'd have access to their entire knowledge base, everything they knew about science, engineering, their history. It's all recorded in these walls." "That's assuming we're capable of understanding it," I countered. "Their conceptual framework might be so different from ours that translation is impossible." Marcus had been quiet for most of the day, studying the star map images from the burial chamber. Now he spoke up. "I don't think understanding is going to be a problem." We looked at him questioningly. "Think about it," he continued. "They anticipated being found. They designed this place to survive for hundreds of thousands of years. They left their city intact, their garden alive, their records preserved. This isn't a tomb that we've violated. It's a library, a museum. They wanted to be discovered, wanted their story told. That means they'd have designed their records to be understood." "You're suggesting they left us a Rosetta Stone," Morrison said, "something to help us decode the rest." "I'm suggesting that glowing message in the burial chamber is exactly that. It's different from all the other markings, more deliberate, and it's the only thing in that entire structure that was actively glowing, not just reflecting our light, but generating its own. That's a beacon, a starting point." Brooks entered the tent, shaking snow from his parka. "Storm's breaking. We've got maybe a 6-hour window before the next system moves in. Command wants us to go back down." "Now?" I asked, surprised. "We haven't even fully analyzed what we found on the first expedition." "Command has made a decision. They're sending additional resources, anthropologists, linguists, engineers. But they'll take 3 days to get here. In the meantime, we're authorized to continue preliminary exploration. Specifically, they want us to photograph and document that glowing message in the burial chamber. If your theory is correct, Mr. Hale, and that message is designed to be understood, we need to start working on it immediately." 4 hours later, we were descending the tunnel again. This time, we were prepared for what we'd find. The device activated, as we entered the central chamber, just as it had before. The doorway to the garden opened. Everything proceeded exactly as our first expedition. But this time, we were recording everything. Multiple cameras, three-dimensional scanning equipment, electromagnetic sensors, chemical analyzers. If there was information to be gathered, we'd gather it. The garden was unchanged, or so it seemed at first. But as we passed through, I noticed something I'd missed before. The plants nearest the path were oriented toward us, their crystalline fronds angled in our direction, following us as we moved. "They're responsive," Morrison said quietly. "The entire ecosystem is aware of our presence." We moved quickly through the residential area, making brief stops only to set up additional sensors and cameras. Our destination was the burial chamber, and the message waiting there. When we entered the circular room, the stellar map overhead blazed to life, brighter than during our first visit. The 7 sets of remains seemed to glow with their own soft luminescence, and the message on the wall, that complex geometric pattern, pulsed with urgent light. "It's reacting to us," Ramirez said, his voice tight. "The entire chamber is responding to our presence." Brooks deployed the high-resolution cameras, capturing every detail of the glowing pattern. "Dr. Ward, Morrison, Hale, I want your initial impressions. Don't overthink it. What does this look like to you?" I studied the pattern carefully. It was complex, yes, but as I looked at it longer, certain elements began to stand out. Repeated shapes, organizational structures, elements that seemed to build on each other in a logical progression. "Mathematical," I said finally. "The foundation of this message is mathematical. Look here. These sequences follow a clear pattern. If I'm reading this right, this might be demonstrating basic principles: addition, multiplication, geometric relationships." Marcus nodded. "Mathematics would be universal. Any intelligent species would develop similar mathematical principles. It's the perfect starting point for communication across time." Morrison was already working on her tablet, attempting to assign numerical values to the various geometric elements. "If we assume this simpler pattern here represents basic counting, and this more complex section builds on that foundation, then this larger structure might be—" She stopped abruptly, her eyes widening. "Oh my God!" "What?" Brooks demanded. "It's not just mathematics, it's physics. This section here, it's describing the structure of matter, atoms, fundamental forces, quantum mechanics, and this part." She zoomed in on a particularly complex section of the pattern. "This is describing something I don't recognize, a form of matter or energy that our physics doesn't account for. They're not just teaching us their language, they're teaching us their science." A sound made us all freeze. It came from deeper in the structure, beyond the burial chamber. A low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. The same frequency we'd felt when the device first activated. "What is that?" Kim asked, her hand moving instinctively to her sidearm. The hum intensified, and suddenly, the wall opposite the burial platform, the wall we'd assumed was solid, began to change. Geometric patterns appeared on its surface, glowing and flowing like liquid light. They formed a new message, different from the first, more urgent. And then the wall opened. Not slowly, as the other doorways had done, but instantly. One moment there was solid stone, the next there was an opening, and beyond it, light. Pure, intense light that made us all shield our eyes. But this wasn't the warm glow of the garden or the soft luminescence of the burial chamber. This was something else entirely, something that made my skin prickle with an instinctive unease. "Everyone back!" Brooks ordered. "Away from the opening!" But even as he said it, the light began to dim, resolving into something visible. A corridor like the others we'd seen, but at its end was a chamber that glowed with a deep, almost purple radiance. And in that chamber was something that shouldn't exist. It was moving. Not the swaying of plants or the darting of fish. This was deliberate, purposeful movement. A figure, humanoid in shape, but wrong in ways my brain couldn't immediately process, moving within that purple light. "Contact base," Brooks said, his voice remarkably steady given what we were seeing. "Tell them we have a situation. Possible active presence within the structure." Morrison's hands were shaking as she worked her radio. "Base, this is exploration team. We have encountered something alive, requesting immediate—" The figure in the purple chamber turned toward us, and though it was too far away to see details, though the light distorted everything, I had the unmistakable sensation of being seen, of being recognized. The humming stopped. The purple light dimmed slightly, and across the distance of that corridor, carried on no medium I could identify, I heard, or felt, I couldn't tell which, a voice. It didn't speak in words, not exactly. It was more like meaning, translated directly into my consciousness. A message that bypassed language entirely. "We waited. You came. Now, choose." "What?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "What does that mean? Choose what?" The answer came, that same direct impression of meaning. To remember, or to forget, to learn, or to remain ignorant, to continue, or to end. "It's giving us an ultimatum," Morrison said, her voice shaking. "The ancient civilization, or whatever survived from it, they're still here, still conscious, and they're asking us what we want to know." Brooks pulled out his satellite phone, but it wouldn't connect. None of our communications equipment was working. We were isolated, cut off from the surface, standing before something that had waited in the dark for nearly 1,000,000 years, and it wanted an answer to a question we barely understood. "Sir," Ramirez said urgently, "my sensors are going haywire. Energy readings are spiking throughout the entire structure. Whatever's happening, it's building toward something." The figure in the purple chamber moved closer, not threatening, but deliberate, approaching us with a patience that felt alien, inhuman, because that's what it was. And I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. This wasn't a remnant. This wasn't a preserved memory or an artificial intelligence following ancient programming. This was one of them, one of the beings who had built this place. Alive, aware, waiting for hundreds of thousands of years for someone, anyone, to find them. We thought we were explorers, scientists uncovering the past, but we'd been wrong. We weren't discovering their story. We were being recruited to continue it. "Dr. Ward," Brooks said quietly, never taking his eyes off the approaching figure, "I need you to make a professional judgment. If we run right now, if we try to retreat to the surface and seal this place behind us, will it let us go?" I thought about the garden that had sensed our presence, the doors that had opened for us, the message specifically designed to be understood, the deliberate revelation of secrets, one after another, leading us deeper into the structure, deeper into understanding. "No," I said finally. "We were invited here. We accepted that invitation the moment we drilled through the ice. Whatever happens next, I don't think we get to walk away from it." The figure stopped at the threshold of the burial chamber. In the purple light, I could finally see it clearly. It was humanoid, but taller, perhaps 7 feet. Its skin had a quality that reminded me of the walls, smooth and somehow crystalline. Its eyes were larger than human, and they reflected the purple light like mirrors. It wore no clothing, but its body was marked with geometric patterns that glowed softly, similar to the markings on the walls. It had been alive when this place was built. It had seen the stars before the ice came. It had survived in this place, alone, maintaining the garden and the machinery and the message for longer than I could comprehend. And now it stood before us, waiting for an answer to its question. Brooks straightened, and I saw him make a decision. Not the cautious, protocol-driven soldier following orders, but a human being standing at the threshold of the most important moment in our species' history. "We choose to learn," he said clearly. "We want to understand." The being tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human. Then it raised one hand and touched the wall beside it. New patterns appeared, flowing across the stone, and I understood, truly understood for the first time, what we were seeing. This wasn't writing. It wasn't data storage. It was the wall itself. The entire structure was a living computer, a conscious network of stone and crystal and technology, so advanced it looked like magic. The beings who built it hadn't created a city. They'd created a mind, a vast, patient consciousness that had waited in the dark, maintaining itself, preserving their knowledge, their history, their very essence. And now it wanted to share it all with us. "Then come," the being said directly into our minds. "Your learning begins." The purple light intensified, and before any of us could protest or retreat, it expanded outward, enveloping us completely. There was a moment of disorientation, of feeling like I was falling and flying simultaneously, and then I was somewhere else, not physically. My body was still in the burial chamber, I could feel that. But my consciousness was elsewhere, in a space that wasn't space, a moment that wasn't time. And in that impossible place, the ancient being began to teach us. I saw their world as it had been, before the ice. Antarctica hadn't always been frozen. Millions of years ago, it had been temperate, covered in forests and rivers. And in those forests, they had evolved. Not humans, but something like us. Close enough to be called cousins, perhaps, in the vast tree of conscious life. They had built a civilization, developed technology, reached for the stars. They had done everything we were doing now, but they had done it first. And they had done it better. But then the climate had changed. The continent had begun to freeze, and they had faced a choice: leave or adapt. Most had left, spreading across the world, becoming something. The visions weren't clear on this point, but I got the impression that their descendants might still exist somewhere, changed by millions of years of evolution. But some had stayed. They had gone underground, building this place as a final outpost. A library, a monument, a warning and a welcome, frozen in time, waiting for whoever came next, waiting for us. The vision shifted, and I saw what they wanted us to understand. The mathematics that governed their science, the principles they'd discovered about the nature of reality, technology that could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, create stable fusion reactions, generate artificial gravity, even affect the flow of time itself. This was what they were offering. Not just their history, but their knowledge. Everything they'd learned in their millions of years of existence, preserved and waiting to be inherited by whatever species came after them. And then the vision showed me the price. Not all their descendants had left peacefully. There had been a war, a terrible, devastating war between those who wanted to preserve their civilization and those who wanted to let it die naturally. The war had nearly destroyed their world. They'd created weapons that made our nuclear arsenals look like children's toys. They'd fought over ideologies we couldn't yet comprehend, made mistakes that had echoed across millennia. They were showing us their triumphs and their failures, their wisdom and their warnings. They were giving us a choice, just as they'd said. We could learn from them, benefit from their knowledge, advance our civilization by thousands of years. Or we could reject it and face all the same challenges they'd faced, make all the same mistakes, risk all the same catastrophes. The vision ended, and I snapped back to myself, gasping. Around me, the others were having similar reactions, breathing hard, eyes wide with the magnitude of what we'd just experienced. The being stood before us, patient and still. "Now you understand," it said. "Now you choose, not just for yourselves, but for your species. Will you accept our inheritance? Will you carry our knowledge forward?" Brooks looked at each of us in turn, and I saw the question in his eyes. He was the ranking official, but this decision was too big for any single person to make. This would affect all of humanity. "We need to bring this to our leaders," Morrison said, "to the scientific community, to the world. This isn't a decision we can make alone." "Time," the being said, and there was something like sadness in the word. "Always you surface dwellers need time. We waited for you, gave you time, but time itself is ending. The ice moves, the world changes. This place will not remain stable much longer. In your years, perhaps 100, perhaps less. When the ice shifts, when the structure breaks, all that we preserved will be lost. The choice must be made now, while the knowledge can still be transferred." "How?" I asked. "How would you transfer it? We don't have the capacity to—" The being touched the wall again, and a new pattern appeared. This one I could understand, maybe because of what it had shown us, or maybe because it was deliberately simplifying its message. The pattern showed a network spreading out from this central location, connecting to thousands of points across the globe. "We built more than this one place," it said. "Smaller repositories, distributed, connected. But this is the core, the heart. From here, all can be accessed. From here, we can begin the transfer. You would need to build receivers, construct interfaces compatible with your technology. It would take time, but less time than learning it all yourselves." "And if we refuse?" Brooks asked. "Then we wait again. Perhaps the next species will be wiser, or perhaps the knowledge will simply be lost, buried beneath the ice forever." I looked around at the burial chamber, at the 7 sets of remains laid out with such care. They'd been the last. The final keepers of this place, who had given up everything to preserve it. They'd lived here alone, maintaining the garden, keeping the machinery running, waiting for someone to find them. And one had survived, one final guardian, living in isolation for hundreds of thousands of years, performing a duty that had outlived its entire civilization, the patience, the dedication required. It was beyond my comprehension. "We need to report this," Brooks said finally. "DeWard, Morrison, Hale, I need you to document everything we've seen, every detail. Command needs to understand exactly what's at stake here." The being tilted its head again. "Your leaders will doubt. They will fear. They will debate while the ice continues its patient work of destruction. We have seen this before in other species. It is why we do not contact directly, why we wait to be found. The choice must come from you, freely made." "But you're pushing us," I said. "You're showing us wonders, offering us knowledge we couldn't possibly refuse. That's not really a free choice." "No," the being agreed. "It is not. It is the only choice we could devise that might work. We failed at this once, long ago. We are trying not to fail again." There was something in that admission that struck me. They were desperate. This being, this guardian, had waited for so long that it was willing to manipulate us, to push us, to offer us things we couldn't refuse, because the alternative was watching everything it had protected simply disappear. "How long have you been alone here?" I asked quietly. The being was still for a long moment. Then, I was the last to enter dormancy. When I woke, the others were gone, failed to revive. That was 473,000 of your years ago. Since then, I have maintained the systems, waited, hoped, and now you have come, and I hope I have not waited in vain. 473,000 years, alone. My mind couldn't process that kind of isolation. It would drive any human insane within years, maybe months. But this being had endured, carrying out its duty across a span of time that made recorded human history look like a brief afternoon. "We'll do what we can," I said. "I can't promise what our leaders will decide, but we'll make sure they understand. We'll make sure they know what's at stake." The being touched the wall once more, and the patterns shifted. "Then, take this. Proof. Evidence. Something your leaders cannot deny." The entire burial chamber suddenly blazed with light, and every surface became covered in writing, not the geometric patterns, but actual text in English, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, and a dozen other languages. The same message, repeated over and over in every major language on Earth. "We are the predecessor. We built this place. We leave it to those who come after. Learn from our triumphs. Learn from our failures. Choose wisely. The universe is vast, but life is precious. Do not waste what you have been given." "How did you—" Morrison stared at the translations. "You've been observing us. For how long?" "Since your species first appeared. We watched you grow, spread across the world, develop your own civilizations. We have always known you were here. We simply waited for you to be ready to find us. And now you have." The implications of that we'd been observed for our entire existence as a species, was staggering. But there was no time to process it. The chamber was beginning to shake, subtle vibrations running through the stone. "Time to go," Brooks said urgently. "This place is becoming unstable." "Not unstable," the being corrected. "Closing. You have seen what you needed to see. Now you must decide what to do with that knowledge. We will wait, as we have always waited. But not forever. Return with your answer before the winter ends, or do not return at all." The purple light was fading, and with it, the figure itself. It was retreating back into whatever space it inhabited when not interacting with visitors. Returning to its patient vigil, watching over a library built to outlast civilizations. We climbed back toward the surface in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The tunnel seemed longer than before, or maybe we were just tired, weighed down by the magnitude of what we'd experienced. By the time we emerged into the cold Antarctic air, the sun was setting, painting the ice in shades of orange and red. It looked like fire on snow, beautiful and terrible. Brooks immediately began making encrypted calls to his superiors. Morrison started organizing our data, preparing comprehensive reports. Marcus and I just stood there for a while, looking out at the endless ice, thinking about what lay beneath it. "They're going to want to study this," Marcus said eventually. "Send teams of scientists, excavate the entire structure, catalog everything." "I know," I replied. "They'll want to take it all. The technology, the knowledge, everything that being offered us." "I know. Do you think we deserve it? After everything we've done to this planet, to each other, do we deserve to inherit their legacy?" I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I don't know if deserve is the right word, but I think we need it. Not just the technology, the perspective, the understanding that we're not alone in the universe, that other intelligent species have existed and struggled and triumphed and failed. Maybe that knowledge will make us better, more careful, more thoughtful about our choices. Or maybe it'll just give us more powerful ways to destroy ourselves. "Yeah," I said softly. Maybe it will. 3 weeks later, I was back in the United States, sitting in a classified briefing room, while government officials and military leaders debated what to do about the discovery in Antarctica. They'd sent additional teams to the structure, extracted more data, documented everything down to the molecular level. And they'd argued. Oh, how they'd argued. Some wanted to harvest everything immediately, reverse engineer the technology, gain strategic advantage over rival nations. Others wanted to seal the place off, pretend we'd never found it, let the ice eventually destroy it. Still others wanted to make it all public, share the knowledge with the entire world. I sat through meeting after meeting, repeating my story, answering questions, watching as the reality of what we'd found slowly sank in. The predecessor, as they were now officially called, had left us a choice. The question was, what choice would we make? 2 months after our discovery, the decision came down. A consortium of governments would establish a permanent research station at the site. Scientists from around the world would be granted access, carefully controlled, but access nonetheless. The knowledge would be studied, preserved, and eventually, gradually, integrated into our civilization. It wasn't perfect. There were factions that wanted more aggressive exploitation and others that wanted complete secrecy. But it was a start, a compromise that might allow us to learn from the predecessor without repeating their mistakes. I returned to Antarctica in the spring, their spring, my fall, as part of the first permanent research team. The structure was exactly as we'd left it, patient and waiting. The being, the guardian, showed itself occasionally, answering questions through that direct transmission of meaning that bypassed language. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I walk down into the garden beneath the ice. The plants are still growing, still tending themselves, maintaining an ecosystem that has survived in isolation for longer than human civilization has existed. I sit by one of the pools and watch the silvery fish dart through the water, and I think about time. Think about the predecessor who had their chance and fell short, who built this place as a second chance for whoever came after. Think about the guardian, alone for nearly 500,000 years, faithfully maintaining systems and knowledge that might never be used. Think about us, standing at a crossroads, holding knowledge that could elevate us or destroy us, depending on the choices we make in the years and decades ahead. The ice is patient. The structure will last for another century at least, maybe longer. We have time to learn, to adapt, to decide what kind of species we want to be. Time itself, as the Guardian reminded us, is always ending. The ice moves, the world changes. Nothing lasts forever except the choices we make and their consequences rippling out through time. We found an ancient civilization under the ice of Antarctica, but what we really found was a mirror, reflecting back at us what we might become, for better or worse.